Are you wanting high-speed internet but don't have access to PUD fiber? Try Sky-Fi high-speed wireless internet from LocalTel. Call 888-8888 today.
Hi, and welcome to Life with Lisa Bradshaw. I'm Lisa Bradshaw, host of the show. I wanted to make it first and foremost clear that this show is not about my life, it's about your life. It's about everyday life here in our community. I welcome your input. I hope I'll hear from you about show ideas and even some advice about the show that you're watching, so be kind. Today's guest will be Melissa Knott. She's going to talk with us about when is the right time to have that conversation and what is the process when it's time to help a loved one into an assisted living situation. She's the Community Relations Coordinator at Highgate Senior Living, and she's got good advice for us today. So stay with the show, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Stay up to date with what's happening in North Central Washington. Go to the NCW Life Community Calendar at ncwlife.com.
Hi, we're back. I'm Lisa Bradshaw on Life with Lisa Bradshaw. We're here with Melissa Knott. She is the Community Relations Coordinator at Highgate Senior Living, and she's here to give us some advice about when to know and how to address moving your loved one to an assisted living situation. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I have talked about this privately before, about how you're the first person people meet when coming to Highgate and having that first conversation or even a tour before they're even sure of how to go about it.
Yes.
So there's some good advice that you have for people who are trying to make that decision.
So I think that the easiest thing to do is to plan far enough in advance so that you can have the conversation with your loved one and they can feel that like they're still in control a little bit. I think that coming in and seeing what it's like, you know, there's all these preconceived notions of what it is to move into an assisted living or a nursing home, and it can be scary. It can be scary for the adult children that they're reaching that time of their life that they have to make these decisions, but it also can be really scary for the senior who feels like they're having to give up control. And just I think coming in and seeing what it's like and seeing that it's not such a scary place is important.
Right, and you have some very specific you know, we're going to try and give bullet points for people watching to really step-by-step how to go about that process. So first of all, we start with begin the conversation long before it needs to happen. Don't wait until it's, you know, your loved one's in a dire situation or an emergent situation.
Exactly. Don't wait to start the conversation with your loved one. You know, I think the earlier you start, the more in control your parents will feel, the more they will feel like they have a say in where they go and in what happens. Also, the flip side of that is if you do wait and you are suddenly faced with an emergent situation, you might not necessarily get the choice of where you want to go, because at that point you'll have to pick whatever's available.
Right, so that's another part where they don't feel in control of where they're going to live.
Exactly.
Going from, you know, some of them have lived in their home for many, many years, their entire marriage or even their whole adult life. And so the beginning of that conversation, and how does that conversation sound?
I think that it's just, you
Different
just
for
be
everyone.
casual. It's different for everyone, and you know your parent the best. And you know, I think that as long as it is far enough in advance and you talk about in the future, sometime down the road, you know, what do you want that to look like, Mom? And how did you picture and how did you plan for spending those years when you can no longer live at home?
And so do you think that that is something, you know, obviously maybe a family meeting, but that might even be a little bit further down the road. So just having casual conversation about it, getting their thoughts before you call all the siblings in to have this big discussion.
Absolutely. I think the more casual you can keep it at first, the better, because you can really truly get a feel for what your loved one is thinking and how they're feeling before they're faced with almost an intervention type situation where all the loved ones come and you feel like you're in crisis and have to move, and
that they're making that decision for you.
Exactly, and then you don't have that choice anymore.
And the other part of that conversation maybe is are they prepared for that? Can they afford it? Do they have long-term care insurance and those sorts of things? So then you're deciding where to place them perhaps in the future based on those criteria as well.
Yes, and I think that that's so important, and those are tough questions to ask. I know even with my own parents and being in this industry now for a while, I've learned to ask those questions. How have you planned financially for this time of your life? Do you have long-term care insurance? Do you have savings, annuities? Do you own property? How is that going to look? And honestly, I see answers range from yes, we knew we would need this, we have prepared completely, we're ready.
That's a nice
and
answer.
And that is a nice answer. Other ones where they just, spent all their money and didn't save or didn't plan for the future, those can be tough situations. It really limits your choice.
Right. So the other part that you talk about is staying connected to your loved one. That's another bit of advice you give. What do you mean by that?
I think that goes back to kind of knowing what they have and what they want and how financially they're prepared, but also who are they as people? I think as our parents start to age, we start to, become busy with our own lives and our own children, and many of us are still working full-time, and how do you balance all of that and still stay connected to your aging parents? I think it's really important to know what they like to do and who their friends are, if they're active in a church, and that will help you not only be able to tell the signs of if they are starting to decline, but also help you find placement where they're going to feel like they're at home, and that community that you're choosing will be able to meet their needs, so that they still can live a purposeful life.
And that connection too goes with not just checking in, well, it can be just checking in every once in a while, but also being connected to what their health and where they are in that part of their life as well.
Yes, it
are
is.
They completely independent right now or not? Is that a consideration as well?
I think that it definitely is. It is so much easier for the children as they move forward with these discussions to know who the physician is and what are their wishes, and do they have more than one physician, and what is their role? And I just think that that's so important to really understand medically what is going on with your parent.
The other part is to learn the typical signs, and that relates to getting closer to having those more serious conversations.
Yes, so as things start to change, I think sometimes this can be the most difficult part for children. Oftentimes, whatever you live in, that becomes your norm. So if you think that your parents aren't eating, you think, well, they're just not hungry, or if you see certain signs, you might just pass it off as a typical aging process and not really realize that it's affecting their health and well-being. So I think some specific signs definitely are ones that we've heard of a lot. Mail and bills piling up and going unpaid, past due notices. Maybe you're taking over food and it's not being eaten. I worked with one family where the food was being eaten, but they found out later that it was being fed to the dog, not to their mom. So just kind of knowing what's going on within their home, whether they're showering, if they're afraid of falling, or if they've had a fall. Oftentimes we'll see that they just stop showering because they're afraid of what would happen if they did fall. Those are all things that can really affect the well-being and actually can further the aging process more quickly than what we would like. So.
Than if they were, getting to the bottom of why they're not eating and finding out, do you need to just as simple as adding a bar to the shower for them to hold on to?
Exactly.
And let it then stay more independent.
Yes.
I didn't realize, I've talked with people who are part of classes for fall prevention, and falling is such a huge risk and fear and recovery when it does happen. So avoiding that is just one step that could keep them more independent for many more years to come if they avoid a fall.
Absolutely, and I think fall prevention could honestly be an episode on its own, because there are so many things that you can do to help protect your loved one while they're at home. You can't ever really prevent 100% people from falling, but it is one of the number one reasons why our seniors are hospitalized, and it can lead to a drastic decline in their health very, very quickly. So being able to prevent that can be quite simple, removing area rugs and things like that within their home.
One of the things, the way that you and I know each other is through the Don't Wait Project. I founded a nonprofit, I guess 6 years ago now. And you brought to me an idea you had about the seniors in our community because you're in touch with them daily in your job. Tell me, let's talk a little bit. You don't have to tell me, I was there, but let's talk a little bit about the Don't Wait History Project that you and I did together. We're going to show a clip in just a minute.
Okay. So I came up with this idea, after working with so many families and learning the residents of where I work and then dealing with my own grandparents as they aged, I realized how many stories we were losing and how important it is to capture that history and be able to give our seniors a voice, but also be able to bridge that generational gap and enable my children and the younger generations the opportunity to hear those stories and to understand that, there's so much more to life than what you're seeing your grandparent do right now. And through that and through my work at Highgate, we've been able to find the most amazing stories.
Really amazing stories. And the thing that I think that we interviewed the seniors at Highgate and throughout the community, started in Highgate. And one thing that kept happening is we'd go through this interview process. One particular person, we interviewed him, and he got pretty tired. We were there a couple hours, and we were going to go back in a couple of weeks, and by then he'd passed away. So it became really apparent to us that, okay, it's great to do these interviews, but how will we archive them? How will we save this information? And that's when we came up with doing an exhibit, and it started at the museum, and it moved to Pybus, and we're going to show a clip. So we interviewed people throughout the several weeks, and then we did this one part at the senior center where we asked everyone the same, seven questions and took their different answers, and we put together little videos that we're going to show you one. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back talking more about assisted living and knowing how to transition your loved one, but take a look at this clip. It's really fun to watch. First question, what about growing older have you enjoyed the most?
None of it.
All my experiences along the way.
I would say leisure time, away from the rat race.
It gives you a great sense of freedom.
Just that I can make my own decision.
What about your youth, if anything, do you miss the most?
Being able to move with agility.
Boy, that's a hard question, Lisa. I think energy, I think muscle mass, those kind of things. You just can't do things without them as well.
I miss when I started playing baseball as a youth. Sports.
I guess probably high school.
The chance to get out in the world.
I miss my mind.
I don't miss anything about my youth.
And what in your personal history impacted you most?
Playing basketball in college.
My life as a deputy sheriff for 23 years.
I got to umpire pro baseball.
Probably my education.
I think what impacted me most was getting a job that I really enjoyed.
The chance to have children.
World War II.
Why?
That's a whole different interview.
Please join us weekly for the 12th District with yours truly, Carrie Condata. Check your channel guide for times or go to ncwlife.com for details.
Hi, we're back. We're talking with Melissa Knott. She is from Highgate Senior Living. She is their Community Relations Coordinator, and she's giving us advice about transitioning your loved one to assisted living. We talked about a couple of real specific ideas about it already. Begin the conversation long before it needs to happen. Stay connected to your loved one. Learn the typical signs. And now one of the bits of advice you give is to know the facts about your loved one.
And we kind of touched a little bit on this before the break about going to your family's doctor's appointments with them and kind of understanding medically what's going on. I think it's really important to know the facts. What exactly are they dealing with? What prescriptions do they have? And what are their wishes? Do they, have an advance directive? Do they want to be kept on life-sustaining treatments? What are those options as well?
So the facts about your loved one, it's hard sometimes to go through, like you talked about, having children of your own, having a busy schedule. Their doctor's appointments are at 11 a.m. and you're at work. But there are ways to communicate, especially with My Chart now that they have here locally, and ways to communicate with the provider. If you can't be there, follow up on the appointment, follow up on the medication, make sure that they're taking it. That would be another sign, right, if medication's piling up.
Exactly.
They're not actually taking it.
If they're not actually taking it, yes. And if you start seeing symptoms that the medications are supposed to be controlled or controlling those symptoms, if you see those start to arise, those are all cause for concern.
So when you talk about the facts about your loved one, so all of these kind of connect together. So it is about making sure that they're eating, making sure that they're going to those appointments, taking their medications, and staying involved, so that it's all kind of trying to avoid that big shocking thing that might happen if they're not getting that daily care that they need.
Absolutely.
At home before they even need assisted living.
Exactly. And oftentimes families will decide, okay, I have young kids of my own, I'm working full time, this is why we need assisted living, is because I can't be the one to go to the doctor's appointment. I can't be the one to monitor medications and whether they're gaining or losing weight and all of that. And so that's really a good time to transition into an assisted living, because that's the beauty of assisted living. We help with all of that.
And sometimes I was just thinking when you said that about my grandmother was very sick and ended up in an assisted living situation. And my mom that was when she wanted to talk about it with us, saying, I absolutely do not want you taking care of me when it comes to that, or your dad. I want us to be in an assisted living situation because of what she went through taking care of her mom. And it really, it's a real difficult thing to be the caregiver and the child, or the caregiver and, that person that's trying to still have that loving parental-child relationship.
Right.
So sometimes having the conversation might be when it's happening to a friend or another family member. A little easier to bring it up at that time.
Absolutely. Whatever, brings that idea up and allows you to start that discussion. I think that that's really important. Caregiver stress is sort of a tagline. It's become very popular, but it's very important to remember that people who are caregiving for their loved ones in any way are under an amazing amount of stress. And oftentimes we find that it's affecting the caregiver's health way more than the actual aging person. So whether that's the adult children or the spouse who just, their health is failing because they cannot do it anymore. And it's really nice to be able to take that stress off of somebody and be able to foster that, go back to that relationship of being a married couple. They've been married and so many times, 30, 40, 50 years, that's a long time to be married to someone to all of a sudden have to start taking care of them.
And that's why we generalized about loved ones as opposed to, a spouse, a husband or wife. It could be anybody. They might not even be married. So then the understanding your loved one's health and medical diagnosis, that's just an extra step further. If they've had a diagnosis that's going to affect where they live, how they're cared for.
Right. So we see a lot of people who have some form of dementia diagnosis, maybe some form of complex medical issues that they're trying to manage on their own, Parkinson's.
These chronic over long-term.
Exactly. These chronic things that over long term, they're going to see a decline. It's just part of the disease process. And so really understanding that disease process and what the future holds for that, what that could look like, so that you're prepared and you're able to make those decisions before crisis hits.
And one of the things about that, I think the advantage to an assisted living situation is that you guys, fortunately or unfortunately, your team sees it every day.
Right.
Every day. You know, for some people, the dementia's been coming on slowly. They see it in their loved one, but the reality of what you know is what to come. And so it might be that much easier to have that family transition to what's to come.
Yes, and so often I hear families say, well, you know, they don't really have dementia, they're just old, and they just, you know, forget. Well,
because we start to forget, so we think that's just a normal part of it.
Exactly, and that's just not the case. I mean, oftentimes, if you're forgetful, it's not because you're old. It's because you do have some form of dementia, and knowing what that could look like it can be scary. It can be scary, you know. And I often tell my families, the beautiful thing about an assisted living is we go and we work hard and we take great care of them, and we're able to go home and be with our families and get that break. When you're in a caregiving situation at home, you don't get that break. You're there all the time. If you're not there, you're worried about what's happening because you're not there. So it comes with peace of mind as well.
And then you also, as the loved one, get to go visit there or pick them up and they get to come visit you. And it's kind of back to that relationship of you know, mother-son, father-daughter, whatever, spouse, so that you're not the caregiver anymore.
Right.
You get that advantage too of going home.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, something at Highgate that we're really passionate about is the families become our family as well. So they show up and enjoy meals with us, they go to the movies with us, they join us for happy hour. So it really becomes this you know, nurturing, caring environment for the whole family.
It's funny, I visited Melissa's group at Highgate many times when we were filming and things, and I remember going to when they had their exercise circle in the chairs. It's great for the families to get to see what's happening. And I remember this one gentleman, and you know, it was obvious he was, you know, handsome, and he probably was, you know, very athletic in his day and quite handsome when he was young as well. And I asked him on camera, I said, so what do you come to circle exercise time for, whatever it was called? And he said, well, I get a little exercise and there's a chance I might get a beer, you know. And you think about that, and it's funny because, you know, they still want to have cocktail hour, or they still want to, you know, it's not just about sitting there playing bingo, although they do that too.
Right.
It is about finding out what each person living there wants to do.
Yes.
And so you guys are great about making sure you nurture that.
Yes, and he does get that beer.
Yeah, he does.
So that's important.
So the last thing on our list here is know the process and do your research. It goes back to, we talked about maybe they should visit a few places on their own without their loved ones so that they could kind of rule out the ones that might not be a good fit.
Yes, and I think it can be very overwhelming when you start, and where do you start, and there's so many options. So really understanding what the process is there a wait list? How does it look to move somebody in? What does that look like? Do I need to reserve a spot now? All of those things are going to vary by whatever community you choose.
Well, I appreciate you being here today. A lot of good information.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I hope that it helps people and just kind of gets them thinking about, you know, what is the next step. Some people might be right in the thick of it, and some people might not deal with it for several months or even years to come, but perhaps this will stick in the back of their mind.
Good.
We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you so much again for being here, and thanks for watching. We'll be back in just a moment on the Life with Lisa show.
Have a fun video you'd like to see featured on NCW Life? Email us at newsphotos@ncwlife.com.
Thanks again for watching the show. If you want to get in touch with me with your show ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Just send me an email, lisa@ncwlife.com. Thanks again for watching.
For all the latest news in North Central Washington, go to ncwlife.com or find us on Facebook. Got a news tip? Email us at news@ncwlife.com or call 888-2020.